here or?
Okay. See, I need my bell. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much for the policy colleagues around the room, which seems to be sitting very much squeezed in. I'm really happy to see that we have so many people that we are on like second rows already. That's wonderful. Just quickly, we are actually live streaming the talks for people that can't be here. But when we get to the discussion, we will stop live streaming so we can have a discussion without being recorded. But for the talks, some of the people who couldn't be here were asking for that to be the case. So, yeah, there we go. So welcome. Practical information. If there is a fire alarm, we will just go through the front door or these doors. The bathrooms are behind us. The coffee room is over there. I don't know if there's anything else practical. The names. Yeah, we'll have a name list of names going around. So please, if your name's not on there, fill it in. And if it is, then just sign so we know who was here. Anything else practically? I think that's it. So why are we here? Well, we are here basically to talk about, well, we're here because we have the Ecopath40 workshop conference and workshops, and I thought it would be a really useful time for us to highlight, well, first of all, listen to 3 days of what the software has been up to for the last five years, because I haven't really been involved with it very much. So I have a better overview now, but also so that we could actually explain to the policy colleagues around the room what can be done, what has been done, and what, will be done. And also to find out from you what we can do, what more do you need from us? So this is part, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm in a EU project called Ecoscope, and we are doing the science policy interface for that. Ecoscope is really about co-designing efficient, holistic ecosystems-based approach to sustainable fisheries management. And it is about incorporating models and tools into a design, into a support framework. And Ecopath is the tool that most of the people in this room is actually using mostly. Ecosystem models have come a really long way, and it is now actually possible to use these complex models to look at a range of interconnected pressures, and to look at the impact of that on ecosystem services. And we heard some really awesome talks this week about how it's being used across the world, in the US, in Japan, in other parts of the world, in Southern Africa, for instance. So just for the people who don't know, and the rest of you can go to sleep for 5 minutes or so, Ecopath with Ecosystem and Ecospace is a suite of tools. It's been, the clue is in the name, 40 years. It's been around for 40 years, but it is actually at its base a very simple model. It is really just like balancing the checkbook of the ecosystem. So for each of this species in an ecosystem, you kind of need to know how much there is, which is depicted by the size of the bubble, and how much that species eats, which is depicted by the Q, and how much of that is then divided into what they produce, how much they respire, and how much they poop. That's the E, the egestion. And then you just need to put it all together. So it's really not much more difficult than that. So when you can put that together for an ecosystem, then you can actually get a spaghetti diagram like this, which makes some of us very excited, but really not most other people. So when you have a model like that, you can try and figure out how has this ecosystem changed over time. And you can do this without data, but of course, that's just playing with computer models. If you have data, then you can really see how you can fit this model to data, and try and figure out the dynamics of this ecosystem over time in going backwards, but also asking what if questions to go forward. And then if you have even more data, then you can do that in a spatial sense. And so that's basically what this tool does in very many different ways, and it's been used for very many different things. So for now, you guys can go to sleep, and the rest of the people in the room can listen. The legislation for ecosystem-based management and implementation in the world has been going for a very long time and is very complex. It basically started in like 1945 with with the Food and Agriculture Organization that started up. And it really is going on until last year, where we had the UN High Seas Treaty and the Action Plan for Fisheries and Marine Ecosystems. So it is a very long-term process, and it has changed quite a lot. And the implementation in the EU is actually also very complex. So this is work that Anna did, and there's a paper out that explains it. And you can see that the process and the actors are very different and very complex, very different to other parts of the world. And we have people from other parts of the world here. So it is a really complicated situation. If we try to take that information and put the common fisheries policy, which is really how you manage fisheries in the EU, in the middle, then this is kind of a way to look at how the different DGs, the different Director Generals of the European Commission, and the different actors address this policy, but also be aware that the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is also really important for this. It's very well linked to the common fisheries policy. So obviously we have two complex situations, and we're trying to merge that in this workshop. So in the Ecoscope project, we actually specifically asked the policymakers and other stakeholders, what do they want these models to do, these tools to do? We had a stakeholder workshop where we really asked them not just about the models, but also about the data, what indicators they need. And we also had a survey where we asked policy stakeholders what it is that they want these models to do. So really what came out is they really wanted to know the effects of climate change, the impact of fisheries, protected areas, the impact of bycatch, and so forth. And so in Ecoscope, we've been taking this information and actually adapting our models to make sure that at the end of the project, we can actually address these questions. So that's it from me. The aim of this workshop is to try and highlight what is possible and what more do we need. And you will see there's a huge amount of projects that I've put the logos of. There's also some projects that don't have logos, but the ones for which I had logos, I put the logos down here. So all of these projects use this tool and have used this tool in Europe. So it's a very, I mean, it's been going for a very long time. And I thought what we should do is we should get, first of all, a talk by somebody from the Commission. So Natalia Serpetti is going to give us a talk from the JRC perspective. They have been using this tool, but connected to lower trophic level models, and so she's going to talk about that. And then we're going to have two or three examples of, I didn't really want to talk about Ecoscope because we're in the middle of our work, but there are projects that have done a lot of work using this tool, and it would be useful to see what they've done with it. So we'll have Rika from Future Mare speaking over there, and we will have Jacob speaking, who's actually from the UK, but he's used it a lot, and he'll probably talk about Ocean ICU, I imagine, Jacob. Yeah, and then ICES, and Akin will talk about how the linking is happening that could really work with the eDitto. So we all have a few sort of examples, and then I think we should really just have a discussion about how we can go forward. So that's it from me. I think the first person to speak then is Natalia. Thank you. No, you should come here. Yeah, you can use the microphone, but I linked it here, so you should be able to. There we go.
Thank you very much. So today I'm here to present some work we have been doing at the JRC in the last many years, I would say, since 2015. So I'm presenting you the Blue2 modeling framework, which is a digital twin of the hydrosphere to evaluate policy option. I walk you through this graph, and our framework is made with models. Then they are coupled offline or dynamically with starting from another dynamic model, an atmospheric forcing, wind, temperature, and precipitation, coupled to, it doesn't come the way I want it. Okay. Coupled to land use model then is linked to hydrological model, and that is the fresh water and in quantity and quality predictions. These are coupled offline to hydrodynamic models and biogeochemical model, and the hydrodynamics, so the currents, they are coupled dynamically with the biogeochemical model. And this is the ocean and physical biogeochemical condition domain. All of this can be coupled, has been coupled with ecosystem models, and we are using Ecopath with Ecosim for doing this. We develop, and these also include fishing forcing, like fishing effort and fishing mortality, that is important in terms of implementing policy options. This has been developed in the Mediterranean Sea so far. So we have different elements of the ecosystem, then they are coupled and to try to answer questions and policies or the what if we are implementing this policy and what is the consequences. So this model is Ecopath with Ecosim. So why we are doing this? Well, why we are doing modeling in general is to try to answer policy questions. So in this framework, we are using Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Water Framework Directive, Zero Pollution Outlook, Biodiversity Strategy, Single-Use Plastic, Common Fisheries Policy, probably first, Action Plan for Conserved Fisheries, and the European Green Deal. So these are the element of the policy we implemented in the past, and we are going to implement it again in our framework. So the framework, it runs from 1960 and is calibrated to recent time from 1990 to 2021. And then we can make a prediction into the future up to 2050 and also 2100 if we want. Important is evaluate the uncertainties in our models. And of course, when we are closer to the temporal interval of our calibrations, our uncertainty are smaller. When we are moving to the future, our uncertainties get bigger. So what do we have in our framework is several domains. Then they are independent model. They have running independently, coupling independently, and have different resolution depending of the hydrodynamics that is following underneath or driving underneath. So we have the Black Sea, the Baltic, and the North Atlantic, Nordic, Celtic domains, and we have the West Atlantic domain and the Mediterranean. So just to give you an example of the horrendous diagram or spaghetti diagram, so one called in the last few days, that is the Mediterranean models, and that is a recently developed Black Sea models. These are organized by trophic level, so we have primary production at the bottom at the trophic level 1, and this is basically how the energy flow into the system from primary producers all the way up to top predators and also the fisheries. In this diagram, the fisheries are represented by the red circles, and the size of the circles depending of the biomass they are taking off from the ecosystem. So what we are doing in this framework in terms of high trophic level is then we are trying to build in this model with the same structure. We need the same structure because ecosystem indicator are structurally sensitive. So if we want to know and compare the output in terms of implementation of policy across basin within the European domain, we need the same structure. And that is why we have been collaborating with many people. Then we met also this week to create a framework that is actually consistent across all the scenarios we are running. So as I said before, our calibration is run around the 1990s to 2021, and is based on observation of climate, observation of fresh water quantity and qualitative, oceanographic condition, and biodiversity. And then we run different scenarios under climate change. In this case, we use RCP 4.5, and we can put what if we are implementing different elements on the policies and see how this one is impacting the ecosystems. So what do we do? Oh, it's exactly the same things I said it, and how we presenting our data, and is the way I'm presenting it here too. Our output is then we are looking at the beginning of the end of our hindcast calibration. So this element here, and then we compare it with the end of our simulation, and we present it as a relative mean change in percentage. So in the current administrative arrangement we are assessing different descriptor and different criteria within the descriptor of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So we are going from biodiversity to commercial to food web, eutrophications, impact on the environment. We have litter and we have noise. Some of these elements can be assessing using a high trophic level, and that is everything is in green is what we are assessing and assessed in the past. What we are in yellow, oranges is what we cannot do in an house, but we will do it using meme collaboration. It's a network of experts. Then we are gonna run some scenarios in parallel with us or just after us, using the driver of the hydrodynamic biogeochemical model the GRCs produce. So we gave them the input as the driver, and then we ran their model to assess the same output within the same framework. And what is red, it's what we are not going to do it in, is basically in this meme collaboration assessing the noise impact. So just to give you some examples, the first one I show, and it's not something I ran it, but my colleagues did it, is impacting eutrophication. So what if we are reducing the nutrients then from river reach to the ecosystems? That will lead, and here I present the results of the Baltic and on the Mediterranean Sea. So we look at percentage of change in the future, and we have our chlorophyll. We have an increase of chlorophyll in the north under these scenarios, which is probably due to the reduce of ice. But we, in the main bodies of the ecosystem, we have a reduction of chlorophyll, so less nutrients, less primary production. And similar is the impact, then it's less homogeneous in the Mediterranean Sea, but we have an overall decline. And that is also, we can assess how this impact in different drivers in the ecosystem. So we can look here at the oxygen. So if we have less nutrients, we might have less anostic in some area of the basin, for example, the Baltic in this case. What does it mean for the ecosystem? So we linked the output of declining of primary productivity in terms of plankton, driven by the declining of nutrients in our high trophic level. And here you can see the results from the spawning stock biomass for anchovy, chosen as an example, in the Black Sea and in the Adriatic Sea. So you can see a reduction of spawning stock biomass and a reduction of the trophic level of the catch. So that is some type of output we can have from our models. So that is another example we recently ran, and it's another what-if scenarios, and it's targeting the water scarcity. As we know, then there have been a severe event of droughts, and less nutrients are getting to the, and less water getting from the river to the ecosystem. So what's happening if climate change, human development is putting an increasing pressure in fresh water? Integrated water management does not typically consider the amount of water, the volume of water in all the framework, from air to land to river, and the consequences to the sea. So what we've done it was to predict the percentage of change of the total water flow then from the main rivers in the Mediterranean Sea reach the seas, the water seas. And the consequences were then with these severes, under the climate change 8.5 RCP, we have a reduction of nutrients of water of 41%. That can lead to overall, you can see it's very patchy, so it's not uniform, but we can get the decreasing up to 40% of the primary productivity in the system. What does it mean in terms of ecosystem, in terms of resources or productivity of our ecosystem? Here you can see the reduction of commercial fish and commercial invertebrates in the Mediterranean Sea breakdown in the sub-regions. So we have a decline up to nearly 15% or maybe 13 in the Aegean. So it's this area very red. So when we have a strong decline on primary productivity, we will have a strong decline on the overall in terms of production of commercial fish and invertebrates. So we can do even a bit farther. So we're trying to assess how much is in terms of money is what we lose. So the number are a bit scary. Is we have a loss of billion euros per year in the 4 basins. So the fisheries losses are similar to the actual EU management Mediterranean fishing. So it's a lot. This is a scenarios, of course, and is run under extreme condition because we are running under climate change RCP for 8.5. So last I'm showing you, it's another element of the high trophic level modeling that we can use in terms of common fisheries policy scenarios. What if we increase the number of marine protected area or the surface of marine protected area in the Mediterranean? So we have 2 cases. One, if we made, there are some assumptions here, all marine protected area, all the Natura 2000 as that altogether currently represent only 10% on the whole basin. And we just make the assumption that these one have been fully protected, so no take zone for any fleet. And we can see then in the marine, in the region, we have an increase of large demersal and large pelagics. So we have a benefits of the marine protected areas. Another scenario has been run is what if we ban the bottom trawling, so only the bottom trawling within these areas. And you can see here then we have assessing 2 different output, what happened inside the marine protected area and at the outside the marine protected area as the whole basin benefits, let's say. So we have then inside big increase in biomass or large demersals and the large pelagics, then it actually leads to not that big increase on the whole basin. And that is actually make you notice then whatever is happening inside is on the food web when we have a change is not a direct response function, but we have to take into consideration the food, the trophic relationship. So what you're expecting then it could happen straight away is not what you actually see. So that is also highlight how important it is to take in all the element of the ecosystem when you are implementing a policy or a policy to protect one species. So I'm happy to take any question. Thank you.
Clarification, or we can just do it. Yeah. Yeah, there's a microphone.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. So I was curious in the scenarios of water scarcity and the first one. What about the fishing strategy? So you assume like cost and fishing strategies, or you test some adaptive management somehow?
You're right, because I think it's something I said it too quickly.
No, okay, thank you.
So what do we do? It's our baseline is actually include the current climate, but also the current policy are already implemented. So whatever has been implemented up to 2021 is part of our baseline. So in the future, we are using, in this case, only climate change, but the baseline we are comparing to, it's anything has been already in terms of policy implemented. So it's not a business as usual, but it is the best version of the business as usual already.
A very short one again regarding the water
Yeah.
scarcity in the Aegean. Did you consider the Black Sea inflow water or just the watershed of the Aegean Sea? Because the difference is huge.
No, I think this one runs only on the Mediterranean domain, so we consider only the rivers in within the Mediterranean. In fact, you can see we don't have much inputs from the south as well. There is the Nile. I expected the Nile was more.
Yeah, but there is in the northern Aegean Sea, the
Yeah.
Black Sea water inflow is responsible for the eutrophication there.
Yeah.
Thank you for a lovely presentation. I was wondering, do you have a way to measure the uncertainties in the models that you do?
That is a good question. I could talk for probably an hour or so about uncertainties in Ecopath, but I'm not gonna do so. So the problem is in ecosystem models, not just in Ecopath models, then because you are aggregating so many elements, you have a huge number of parameters. That means that when you are linking them together, your uncertainties grows up. So the only way we can reduce the uncertainty could be two ways. One is assessing the uncertainty, the propagation to the system, given an uncertainties of the input. So it's what we call a Monte Carlo. So you gave a variation on the input to see that how it propagates over time and also over space. Another way is to try to validate your model. So you restrain your parameters order or do an ensemble of models. So you run lots of models together and your output will be the results of an ensemble, which is probably the best way of doing it to reduce the uncertainties. Well, it is yes or no, because it's difficult to average output across an ensemble from different trophic level or different models, then they're coming from different areas. So you're rather doing lots of, you should do different models from the same area, run with different ecosystem models to reduce really the error. Thank you.
I don't know if there's more, but maybe we can have a conversation later and we can talk a lot more about it because we talked a lot about it this week.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Natalia. Then I think the next speaker is Jacob, who's going to talk about, why is it not working? There we go. There we go. I'm going to let you.
Thank you, Sheila. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's me again. Hi to everyone that's new. Be good to catch up with you later. So I'm Jacob Bentley. I'm the Principal Specialist for Marine Ecosystem Modelling at Natural England, which is a government advisor in the UK. I have a background in food web modelling, but more broadly, kind of fisheries, ecosystem-based management advice at the Science Policy Interface. So a lot of my work is based within ICES, integrated into ICES Science and Advice. So today I'm going to talk about ecosystem-based fisheries management and some ways we're actually using Ecopath with Ecosim to make operational changes in the way that we look at fisheries and in the way we provide management advice for fisheries. So this is going to be preaching to the choir, but the first point is just to highlight how interconnected the CFP and the MSFD are. There are multiple statements within both policies. They acknowledge that the CFP should be looking at aiming for good environmental status, taking an ecosystem-based approach, whereas in the MSFD, we're wanting to integrate the structure and function of ecosystems, and it should be consistent across other policies, including the CFP. So we've been looking at how we can generate advice to how we can change existing advice so that we meet these objectives and make these connections. Because it's been relatively stagnant in fisheries advice for a long time. We have focused on single species, and we've been trying to push multiple ways to get ecosystem information into that advice, but it's not necessarily always easy to do given the limitations of existing frameworks. So it's like we're trying to find not necessarily loopholes, but kind of creative ways that we can work with the existing frameworks we have for MSY and start making them more ecosystem informed and more robust to any changes in climate and the environment. So going on that, so this is something that's been coming up a lot recently, the extent to which ecosystem information is included in current ICES advice. I'll focus specifically on a question on the needs of predators, because this is, again, a hot topic. There was a request from the EU and the UK to ICES earlier this year or last year around forage fish and how much the predators' needs of forage fish are accounted for in the management of forage fish advice. And there's kind of these three viewpoints that you'll get around this topic, depending on who you talk to in terms of stakeholders or NGOs. or scientists. The first one is that predators' needs are accounted for in ICES advice. And that kind of statement comes from the fact that a lot of our single species management procedures now are becoming more ecosystem based by including variation in natural mortality based on predation pressure. And while that's a step towards ecosystem-based fisheries management, it still is with the priority of making sure that assessment best reflects the dynamics of that stock. So you want to make sure you're not overexploiting it and you're able to achieve MSY. Then if you go to the second viewpoint, they'll say predators' needs are not accounted for because the advice is prioritizing the target species, keeping it a biomass that sustains catches. You're not thinking about the predators. You're not thinking about if there's enough food to sustain the predators, which is also a valid statement. But where I think a lot of us in this room would sit and where we probably sit within ICES is the fact that when you're including predator information in a single species assessment, this is a step towards EBFM. However, the management priority is largely MSY, and predator needs are not the priority. We're not looking to see whether there's enough fish in the sea to enable the recovery of certain predators, for example. But if we want to do that, we have the tools to do it. And this is where this community comes in, because Ecopath with Ecosim is one of the primary tools we have to start asking these questions. So we can do it, and we can start exploring these trade-offs if that's what requesters start asking for. So these are kind of a few examples of how we're actually operationalizing ecosystem-based fisheries management. I'll go through some actual examples in more detail, but what we're doing is we're looking at implicit ecosystem-based fisheries management. So this is kind of the single stock world still, and this is where you start varying natural mortality over time in relation to changes in predators, and this kind of referred to as implicit or accidental EBFM. And this is where you're improving the quality of the stock assessments with best available knowledge, and part of that just happens to be including ecosystem information. You then have more direct ways to include ecosystem information, and that's through things like ecological reference points, which I give some examples of. And this is how we try to augment or change catch advice so that you have objectives that might link to ecosystem objectives too in the advice that comes out of it. There's then management strategy evaluation. So management strategy evaluation is a tool that we use quite a lot in fisheries to test the robustness of our advice over time and add additional uncertainty to see how robust our advice is. And what we're slowly starting to do here is feed in new ecosystem information. So things like changes in natural mortality based on predation pressures or climate-driven stresses, but also trying to identify, can we make more food web-focused performance metrics to analyze how good our catch advice is? Because a lot of the time when we run management strategy evaluation, we mainly want to see, okay, do we achieve the yield we want? Is the stock safe? In that kind of concept. But what we can actually start doing is saying, okay, we know that there needs to be X amount of food in the system for predators to reach the target that policy has set. Does this management strategy leave enough food so that we can achieve our other objectives? And then there's more kind of conservation advice, which is more strategic. So Ecopath of Ecosim gives you a really good story of how ecosystems function. And from that, you can take strategic information, which can kind of qualitatively, but in sometimes quantitatively inform policy and management directions. So the first example, which I presented to some of you yesterday, but is new to a lot in the room, is a new ecosystem-based reference point called FECO. And this was recently adopted in ICES. And what this allows you to do is change or add an ecosystem-based catch reference point within the existing FMSY ranges. So this is the fishing at maximum sustainable real yield ranges that ICES provide for their category 1 stocks. And the idea here and how we're actually using Ecopath with Ecosim, well, we start with identifying where there's a need in the system. So where a stock is suffering and it might be linked to some change in the environment. We then develop an Ecopath with Ecosim model that we run through ICES. We get a key run, so it's reviewed properly. And in this step, we start to identify, okay, what are the indicators that are linked to this stock's dynamic? And then you'll pull out this indicator over time. This is linked to production of a certain stock. It's not included in the assessment at the moment because this is an ecosystem process. But what we can do is we can look at how this indicator's changed over time. And if we say it's in a really bad phase now, and this is going to be hurting your stock, what we'd suggest with FECO is that perhaps fish towards the lower end of your range to reduce any cumulative impacts. This is operational for cod in the Irish Sea at the moment. There are a lot of other stocks that are going to be picking this up, and there are a lot of people in this room, including Chavi, happy birthday, that are looking to apply it for their regions as well. The second example is some work from Dave Chigaris. I don't think Dave's in here at the moment, but this was applied to menhaden in the US. And this is really cool. This is starting to change your catch advice, taking into consideration trade-offs between prey and predator. Again, it's a very similar process. It was almost developed in parallel to FECO and ICES, but the first stage is identifying this need. So in the US, it's menhaden. It's a really important forage fish that feeds a lot of predators. They developed an ecosystem model and they identified the predators which were most sensitive to changes in this prey. In this scenario, that's striped bass, which I think is a recreational fishery that's really important over there. And when you think of fishing mortality and the impact it has on prey and how that impacts the predators, it's highly connected, because the more you fish your prey, so along this x-axis here, the predator biomass can't reach its potential because it doesn't have enough food in the system. So you can start to look, okay, if I start fishing the prey less, is there then enough food in the system so that the predators can reach their biomass target? So they've done this for 2 fish species, but it's the same concept. You could do it for other predators, seabirds, marine mammals, ensuring there's enough food in the system to support your other objectives. And in this case, this is then fed into single species advice. So these are all things that are this is all real world applications of Ecopath40 in ecosystem-based fisheries management. The third one, and this is happening a lot now, is exploring the ecosystem importance of forage fish. We're getting more and more questions about whether we should be managing forage fish for predators. Is there enough forage fish to support the recovery of predators? So Ecopath40 is really good at identifying or characterizing the ecosystem role of these species. And we're able to give that information and generate scenarios to show what happens if the species is lost from the ecosystem, where are you expecting the main issues to be, and also to prioritize what species you want to focus on, what parts of the ecosystem are kind of most important to its overall functioning. And this is my fourth and final example. And this links to an EU project, Ocean ICU, which I'm working on, as well as Angela Martin, who's over there, and Paula Silva, who I'm not sure is in this room, but she gave a really nice presentation on work she's doing. And this is trying to look at the role of fish in a much broader context, so we can start giving ecosystem-based fisheries management that acknowledges that they have really important ecological roles. So in Ocean ICU, we want to look at the impact of fishing on the biological carbon pump, because fish are not just something we land and we eat, but they also play a really important role in the actual cycle of carbon in the ecosystem and how much is sequestered. And we know very little about how fishing impacts that. So what Ocean ICU is doing, it's a really nice kind of transdisciplinary project that's looking across loads of different impacts, including the impact of deep sea mining on this biological carbon pump. So it's still a young project. I think it's in its 2nd year now. But we've already had some decent outputs and papers coming from this that are going to hopefully be informing the way we start constructing Ecopath40 models. So we have all these tools, and the big problem we have is, I guess, is understanding how the output should be used. It's kind of what you need from us. So this ICs and other scientific advisors, we need to know what information you need and in what form, so that we can support ecosystem-based fisheries management. I've had these conversations quite a lot. There's also often been comments at meetings and conferences at ICs that EBM and EBFM is not progressing because no one's asking for it. But then when we work with decision makers, they often, the ones we work with often don't know what to ask for. So there's almost this disconnect in making sure that the ecosystem information that we can provide ends up in the advice that's requested. And I just highlighted here a report that came out from Pew earlier this year, just about formulating requests to advice givers. And it's really nice. I suggest everyone read this. It's about how we prepare and design request processes, how we define the scope of our questions, and then how we formulate them and monitor requests over time. So it's a really important step that's often overlooked. And then finally, I wanted to touch on how we can improve the ecosystem-based advice we currently give. So within ICs, I do a lot of work, and others in this room as well, Rika, work a lot with ecosystem overviews. So this is one of the projects that ICs delivers in response to advice requests, and it gives the status of the overall ecosystem. Compared to catch advice, and this is advice, it's seen as relatively soft because it kind of just describes the status of the ecosystem. It doesn't really direct necessarily any actions, but we have the scope and the space to start doing that. And within ICs, we're kind of talking about how we might want to augment or what products could go into this to better inform ecosystem-based management decisions, management planning, and things like that. So we have this space, so we want to kind of make sure that the products that go into this, the information, are the ones that can best support the information you need to formulate policies, trade-offs, projections, and risk evaluations. And we're using Ecopath40 pretty much in every single group that produces these ecosystem overviews. So that's it from me. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Been 3 days and still I can't get out of the light. Any questions? No?
No worries. Thank you.
You can always catch it later. Yeah. Yeah, so next we will have Rika, and she's going to be talking about something different.
A little bit different. Am I
No,
going
it's-
to-
it's-
Sorry. I'm doing something wrong in here. I can use the clicker as well. Thank you. So my name is Rika Puntila-Dodd. I'm working in the Finnish Environment Institute, and I have been part of the Future Mares project, or little part of it, for the past 4 years. And in this room, there's also Xavi Corrales, who is going to help addressing any questions you might have, because Marsa or Grace Lynham can't be here, and they led the whole work. So we are here to represent the whole project. The whole Future Mares project is massive, and we are actually here just talking about the application of Ecopath with Ecosim and Ecospace that we did in the project. Our main goal was to produce actual advice on how to best use or evaluate the performance of nature-based solutions to protect biodiversity and ecosystem services. And the research was designed around defined nature-based solutions. In this case, it would be restoration and protection, and also included some nature-inclusive harvesting. There was a lot of work that was done throughout Europe, experimental work, modeling work, stakeholder work, and I'm only going to talk about a little bit of it, but there is a website, futuremares.eu, where you can find the deliverables that we produced so far, and then some other messages. As I said, the part that I'm representing here is task 4.4 that we very much love by now. Our overall aim was to model the impacts of human pressures and management on habitats and biodiversity and certain species under different climate change scenarios using spatial temporal tools. We also were aiming to address potential trade-offs in these management strategies and see how they might affect the diversity function and ecosystem services. This is the general workflow that we followed. I'm not completely sure if we were aware of the massive amount of work that we were facing when we started, but it ended up being quite humongous. So in the work package 2, they extracted model data from Earth system models and downscaled it to our systems. We then extracted the biogeochemical model outputs that we were able to use in our respective case study areas. Then there was a massive workload that was included in actually building and developing the scenarios. There was a whole work package for that, where the stakeholder interactions were used, and we created together these general scenarios of global sustainability, natural enterprise, and world markets. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those later. Then we took this, adapted it to Ecopath with Ecosim World, and used our models and did the scenario runs all together. So we did it standardized way, working together. Then what we ended up with was, 10 external hard drives of data. And that started another process, which was work with R and trying to boil down some results of all that massive amount of information that we did. We concentrated on certain commercial species that we named from each of the regions, vulnerable species that would be protected in each area, or certain ecosystem indicators or ecosystem processes. We also did evaluate the impacts on catches. So this was really important part of the work, so making the scenarios happen. And that was done together with stakeholders, as I mentioned. And that was a whole work package where people were interviewing stakeholders, discussing a lot and boiling down what do these things mean in terms of the different futures. We then sat down with modelers and tried to boil that down to how we are going to execute that in our modeling world. Because Ecopath with Ecosim is a very nice and flexible tool, but it doesn't have a place for all of these little details that we wanted to do. And this was really, really interesting. And I think we pushed the boundaries of the model, and we also learned a lot in the process, and now can help others if you struggle with the similar issues. Just a very brief mention to another project that we are now working with the Guess4Cs, and we're going to do the same with certain spatial things that are waiting for us. Here is just an example what I meant by the MPA scenarios. So we had the global sustainability scenario where we assumed that everybody's happy and everybody's adhering to the environmental regulations. We are hoping to get a better future. And including into that scenario was to increase the MPA network to reach the targets of 2030. In global sustainability scenario, we had 20% protected areas. And in the national enterprise and world market scenarios, we had only 5% fully protected and another 5% of highly protected. And here also we had some fishery restrictions that followed the idea of world markets only protecting valuable fish species and their breeding grounds. And in global sustainability, we would protect all the vulnerable habitats along the coasts. And we, in all the cases, we included also the status of the current protection, which is variable in our region. So only only in few locations we had existing protection where there were actual no-take zones. No, not all the regions had that. So we had several models in our use. We had 4 regional models: North Sea, Baltic Sea, Bay of Biscay and Western Mediterranean that captured larger scale processes. In addition, we had sub-regional ecospace models that were partially overlapping with the larger models. This helps a little bit with when we go further into our results, we may see some differences in the processes in these smaller regions. Plus, for the North Sea, we also had the oyster model. Then to the results. And first, I'm actually going to walk you through the invention of lollyplots that we did in the project. So here we are visualizing a lot of data, so it's very aggregated, and we are trying to show everything in one picture, which might be a little complicated sometimes. So here we are looking at key commercial species and their biomass. And we are actually looking at change to baseline, and the baseline represents the current situation. And here we are also showing 3 time slices: 2030, 2050, and 2100. And here in the x-axis, you see all the different models that we used. Furthermore, there is another dimension. So all these field symbols, they are representing the scenarios that included the effort reduction, the spatial protection, the restoration scenarios, and the hollow ones include just the climate change. So we ran the model with just climate change. So not that effect includes that and nothing else. These guys also include the spatial protection measures and other nature-based solutions. And here, the main point is that you see differences. There are large differences between regions, and some of that can be explained by the scale. For example, here in the Archipelago Sea, we are talking about a tiny, very diverse region, whereas most of the other regions are larger. Then you can also see that the differences increase over time, and the protection seems to be making a bigger difference to key commercial species. Then in terms of conservation species, we see pretty similar trend. So in 2030, the differences are still minor because the actions took place 2030, so nothing has happened yet. And then as you go further in the timeline, you see the differences increasing. The general trend here is that actions matter. And in the global sustainability scenario, we end up getting higher biomasses for both commercial species and protected species. There is a trade-off, as you could expect in this case. So we see declines in catches under the global sustainability scenarios. But I would like to highlight that, for example, in my region that I know better than the other regions, and I've been working a little bit more with the data, you do see recovery of catches. Sorry, here. And also, there is a redistribution of catches. So catches get declined in trawling, but since we are decreasing the trawling effort, the catches get redistributed to the coastal catch. So the other gears end up catching more. And there is a little bit of a rebound effect towards the end of the century. Then we wanted to look specifically how the MPAs are working. And here again, we have lollyplots with the same situation. So we have a difference between the scenarios and between the status quo and the year slice that we are looking at here. And you can see that in all the cases, the biomass increases most in the scenarios where we have most protection. So the MPAs in this case seem to be working. And this applies both to the commercial species and the conservation species. And what is interesting is that this impact is especially noticeable in places where we have very little protection so far. So then you are making a bigger difference than in the North Sea, where a lot of MPAs are already in place. Then we are going to the take-home messages. We do know that climate change is projected to change quite a bit in our ecosystems in Europe. And we are able to show, even with a lot of variance, we are showing that there are different trajectories between the climate change scenarios and the NBS scenario. So the nature-based solutions can, in at least some cases, buffer some of the changes that we see by climate change. There is very much room for ecosystem-based management interventions, and they can be crucial when we are shaping the future of the European seas. So I only scratched the surface of very freshly produced results. There will be a deliverable very soon, hopefully happening in the Future Maris website. So feel free to try download that and look into the results a little bit more. We are also working on a manuscript on the subject. Oh, there was some animation that I didn't expect. First and last, I want to thank the whole team. So we had a massive team working on the same idea and same execution of ideas. And I think this was a fantastic way of bringing both the modeling forward, but also doing the actual work. And we helped each other, and I think all of that is actually visible in this conference too. So this is how Ecopath with Ecosystem people tend to work with. So it worked well for the project, and hopefully works well for the software as well.
Thank you. I knew you were placed. I could see it.
Yes. Is it okay? It's okay. Hi, very interesting. Thank you very much. You said that you developed the scenarios with a variety of stakeholders. Can you give a little bit more information on what kind of stakeholders those were? And to answer my second question, then you have presented the results of the scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Have you discussed the results of the scenarios with the same stakeholders and got feedback on the information, and if the information is in the form that is required to support their decision-making or future work?
That is a very good question. I wasn't actually part of the stakeholder work, so I'm not sure who were included. It was the work run by Myron Peck. So I have to assume that EU was somehow involved in the stakeholders. But yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more. And we have not had a chance to talk to the stakeholders, but if that is not happening now, I'm going to take that thought and bring it to the project, if that's okay with you.
It's very okay with me. I think I find the work very interesting.
Yeah.
I think there is missing important connections with what may concern the stakeholders in the short term. Because if you have policymakers and fishermen around the table, they are not going to care very much about what's happening in 2100.
Yeah.
They want to know what will happen next year and the year after that.
Yeah, yeah.
And the way that the results of the scenarios are presented need to include a little bit of thinking around that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We are going to do that for sure.
Other questions, comments?
Jeroen?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add to this is that what we pioneered here in the Future Matters is not only going to be applied to just for Cs, but also with his sister project Act Now, including different modeling approaches. And we hope to set a new benchmark in this standardized approach to become intercomparable and interanalyzable, which is not done in Europe. And we hope to set a new trend with this because we think there's huge value in it.
And here, like a massive thank you for Jeroen for being involved, because he was fixing a lot of things that we asked him throughout the process.
If I may, I don't know if there's any other questions. I will, coming back to Zoe's comment, I completely agree, Zoe, that we need to, well, first of all, the reason we in Ecoscope are doing it the way we are doing it is because we really want to take those results back to the policymakers and actually help, you know, give them what we've produced and see what it is at the end. So I think that's really important. But I also know that in other projects that Jacob and I worked with the fishermen in the Irish Sea, for instance, you know, that was one of the most valuable things, was going and giving them back their results, because actually that's the way you kind of keep the stakeholders involved. And I think that's something we really need to discuss after the coffee is how can we make sure that we keep the stakeholders involved, and how can we not have stakeholder fatigue in all of these many projects? So keep that for the after coffee discussions. If there's no more questions, I think we have one more talk, and then we're going to have coffee, and then we're going to have a discussion. Thank you very much. Yeah, she said there's one more slide, but you can skip it. Yeah. You will do it?
Yeah.
So the theme is very talk about how we think these things should be together somehow. Hopefully. Hopefully you're going to talk about it, or hopefully we can link it.
Hopefully. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Ekin Akol from Middle East Technical University, for those who don't know me yet. And I'm an armchair ecologist. That's how I'd like to name myself, because I don't often go to the field, but I like to sit in my chair in the office and contemplate the data and the bits and pieces of data, and try to make sense out of it mathematically. So I think the best thing to identify a scientist is like this is armchair ecologist, maybe. And I will talk about how we can link Ecopath with Ecosim to aid in the efforts of the digital twin of the ocean. So this is my outline, and I will start. Maybe the first part will be a bit boring, because I'm going to make EWE propaganda to you, who you are already in love with EWE, I know, but I can't refrain myself from doing it. I will do. And yes, and why we need this Ecopath approach in EDITO, or in general digital twin of the ocean. And I will, this will be a more technical side of the things. I will just show you a brief overview about what has happened over a decade, considering Ecopath with Ecosim in Fortran, rather than results of scientific research. And then, yes, I will conclude with a few take-home messages. Oops. Yes. Okay, so policy development requires comprehension of the dynamics of the ecosystem in its entirety, and societal factors, and the related economic system. Yes, the ecosystem is important, all the components, biotic and abiotic, but also societies that are benefiting from it, like fishing communities and cultural beliefs and let's say ethos related to this marine environment, and also the economic system, the livelihoods of the communities, and how they evolve over time. This is we all know, and Ecopath approach provides all this in one complicated and sophisticated, although complicated but sophisticated manner. And what makes, in my opinion, Ecopath with ecosystem so widely spread is its features, basically, the versatility. So you have many things in one package, not just the ecosystem perspective, but you have the economic perspective. You can have the societal perspective and also ecological perspective. So it's a quite versatile tool with many plugins developed over time, and it grew into a big, let's say, capable software for many things that you can think of, you can use and rely on. And it's comprehensible. So it's more relatable to us, let's say, natural scientists or ecologists or biologists, what's going in and what's going out. And it makes the representation of these things more relatable in our minds in terms of societal outcomes or economic outcomes or ecological outcomes. So we can, compare to other models, in my point of view, we can easily relate and understand what Ecopath outputs means. And it's ubiquitous. This is the distribution of not so recent, but distribution of EWE models around the globe. So for a given ecosystem that you think to carry out a research, probably there's already an Ecopath with ecosystem model available. So this is good if you are going to move forward to a digital twin of the ocean, because you don't need to start from scratch. You can take it because these models are published and verified or validated, and most of the time available in Ecobase. So it's really accelerating the process. And yes, applicable. So it produces many, not just the outputs in terms of time series of data or numbers, but also it produces management advice by using different plugins, for instance, FMSY routine, maximum sustainable yield, and other routines and plugins available. You can make it applicable and convert it to management advice or rules and regulations for the policymakers. And finally, it's adaptable. And I think over the 3 days we have seen many applications, even game engine coupled to Ecopath with ecosystem, to visualize different scenarios almost in real time. So what happens in different incarnations of the future, let's say IPCC climate scenarios. And also you can adapt it for many things. So you can use it in terrestrial ecosystems, you can use it in marine ecosystems, you can use it for anything you can think of. It's just almost limited with your imagination. So this makes Ecopath approach so long-lived, maybe immortal, and yeah, I hope, and immortal and a perfect fit for the digital twin of the ocean. There are already useful tools for the hydrodynamic models, hydrodynamics and the biogeochemical aspects of the marine ecosystem, and we have Ecopath with ecosystem and ecospace. So the hard thing is, already we have seen some other methods to link models, but the hard thing is linking EWE with physical and biogeochemical models in the marine environment, because they are mostly coded in a different language, so they speak different languages. So the task is to make them understand each other. And mostly physical and biogeochemical ocean models speak Fortran. And Ecopath with ecosystem speaks Visual Basic.NET. So it limits it to a certain environment most of the time. But over time, all these years, there are approaches developed already by very clever scientists to overcome this, let's say, I don't want to say limitation, but this difficulty and to make to bring Ecopath with Ecosim and biogeochemical and physical models on the same page. And over the years, this is not so comprehensive, but I took this. There was an attempt, it still exists, a coupler lib. The aim was not to touch Ecopath with Ecosim, but with the intermediary software, make it speakable or to biogeochemical and physical models back and forth. And also there are different implementations developed in time, like Ecopath with Ecosim in Fortran in 2015. And there is this RPath we have already seen during the conference. It's applications and Ecopath MATLAB. But yes, it doesn't have an Ecosim module yet. But there are different, let's say, solutions already developed. But to my taste or my point of view, it would be more straightforward to use Ecopath with Ecosim in Fortran to link with biogeochemical and NEMO, for instance, or BFM or AirSam models, more straightforward by using by becoming a part of the digital twin of the ocean for the Europe. So what is Ecopath with Ecosim in Fortran actually? It's like pulling the rug out of under Ecopath, considering the lower traffic level groups, like plankton groups and detrital groups. You remove it from Ecopath with Ecosim, you pull the rug out from under Ecopath, and you replace them with BFM or AirSam, name your favorite biogeochemical model. And the rest here at the top is handled by Ecopath with Ecosim. Birds, mammals, fish, invertebrates, whatever you name, or zoobentos in the marine environment. So by this way, we can combine the best of both worlds together. Okay. So it started with the first implementation in a zero-dimensional in the Gulf of Trieste, using a model by Cosorini and Solidoro in the Gulf of Trieste with my colleagues from OGS. And this was the baby steps. It was zero-dimensional. Then it evolved into a multi-layer model in different basins, multi-layer, but not in the depth dimension, but vertical dimension in a 2D dimension in the Gotland Basin, combining it the Balts and Baltic Sea model, linking it with the Baltic Sea model. This has not been published. And it ended up with the North Atlantic Sargasso Sea model coupled to a biogeochemical model in one dimension, including the diel vertical migration of mesopelagic fish species. And we investigated the changes in carbon export dynamics, plus the ecosystem and food web effects if mesopelagic fish are harvested, because they are the new potential targets for the fishers to fish food, to obtain fish food. So this ended up like this. And what the ultimate aim is to link it to a three-dimensional implementation. And again, this is from the Black Sea, an earlier publication. So we could compartmentalize it, not exactly the same with EcoSpace, but to have different management advice or different predictions of the changes in the fish assemblages in the different regions of the Black Sea, coastal, deep sea, and this kind of different environments by coupling it to BeamSeco, a biogeochemical model of the Black Sea developed in my institution. So it's evolving, maybe slowly, but we are coming there. And we don't have all the bells and whistles or sophisticated plugins of Ecopath with Ecosim, like value chain, FMSY routine, or network analysis, or ecological indicators. But it's promising for the digital twin of the ocean. How? By carrying out different scenario simulations and then assessing the outputs, and probably in the future, implementing these useful routines also in the Fortran version. So it's almost an identical digital twin of Ecopath with Ecosim, the original Ecopath with Ecosim. And therefore, it is promising for policy explorations, not just for the digital twin. So yes, this is all I would like to say. And thank you very much for your attention. I conclude with this XKCD comic, and this is the comment from Professor Edelman and Sanders from MIT. I thank them for their useful insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Question? Comments?
Thank you. Great talk. I've, thought a lot about this end-to-end modeling frameworks and the difficulties. And this looks like a important new tool. Wanted to add on. You said that some of the hard part is linking the ocean biogeochemical outputs into EWE. I see kind of two other huge hurdles that, as a community, we or I think are working towards, but want to continue talking about. One is how we link those into the EWE models. And so those are those environmental response functions, which we have different methods of doing. Natalia's worked on that, Xavier's worked on this. There's assumptions made there that I think managers might be uncomfortable with for good reason. And I think that's kind of a hurdle in operationalizing this. And the other big one is validation for these spatial models. If we have these end-to-end models that show that we're going to have distribution changes, we have to validate the hindcasted models in order to deliver probably predictions that managers will trust. And I think that's kind of a critical area that we need to continue working on.
Yes, thank you very much. I agree with you. So that's why I think that these kind of assemblies are really useful to discuss on, to develop a very sensible and concrete approach for this. Otherwise, if you rush things through the pipe, then it may become a mess. We may risk things. So thank you very much for your comment.
No? From anybody else?
Maybe one comment on this the last point.
Sorry.
Managers. I think it goes as far as how to explain what the different scenario contains, because even that step is extremely complicated, because it's not only about the climate scenario with 1.5, 2.5, or 8. It's a multiple space of policy choices that need to be considered all together, and that is very complicated to communicate, in my view. And I have difficulties just to see the ensemble of the problem. So now we need to explain how these different scenarios and hypotheses interlink to each other in a result which the endpoint that is really of interest to the policymaker or to the business operator. So how do we do that? I think it's a very complicated question that we need to address all together.
Sorry, I'm going to say something that is a little bit provocative and represents only my opinion and nobody else's. And I would suggest that an interesting scientific thought would be to consider that maybe policymakers and managers don't have such a lack of understanding of the potential implications of management choices, but may choose to ignore them, and may also choose. I would say that this is a valid consideration of how this science policy discussion will evolve in the future. Maybe they know, and maybe they are going to continue asking the same question until they get the answer that they want. And until then, we are going to pretend that the science is not enough. I think that this is an interesting consideration when you build models that are speaking for science policy interface, because environmental scientists have the very worthy aim to protect the environment and find the more sustainable solutions, but this may not be a feasible way forward under the regime that we are living. And a possible way to move the discussion forward is to discuss also less sustainable solutions as viable in the policy regime. Again, my opinion, nobody else's.
No, mine too. No, it's a really good point. And I was just going to build on what you said as well about the melting pot of pressures. We're, as a community, moving towards like cumulative impact assessment, and it's what we're kind of good at doing. It's what Ecopath40 can do. There was a really nice paper that came from Jason Link last year, based in NOAA, saying that it's past time we start using this to look at cumulative impacts, and we are fisheries, offshore wind. But something we're getting really good at is also looking at trade-offs. So, looking at the different scenarios that are available to us in Ecopath with Ecosim and other ecosystem models, what we're doing by looking at these cumulative impacts is we're assessing just exactly that. And we're going wider than ecological impacts, looking at economic, social, community resilience, these kind of things. And that's kind of, I guess that's the forefront of where we are now. And that's kind of what makes the community slightly stand apart from other existing approaches at the moment. So we've got a lot to kind of demonstrate, which we can do.
I may build on that. And actually, I think what Zoe was saying was maybe not that. I think what Zoe was saying was we all, even maybe some of the policymakers might know that the policy decision isn't necessarily the most sustainable, but that is not actually what the people making the decisions will not make the right decisions, what we consider the right decisions, because they have different drivers. And their drivers might be big money, big oil, whatever. And we have to think about, we can hit our head against that brick wall for the next 5 years till the next commission comes in, or the next, American president, or whoever. But we also need to find a way to, maybe we need to find other stakeholders to talk to, If the policymakers aren't going to listen to us, then maybe we need to speak to WWF more or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm being more provocative there now, but I think so. Maybe we should go for coffee and stop live streaming, and then we can have that conversation. We have another question somewhere.
That was me, Howard Townsend with NOAA Fisheries Service. So 2 thoughts there. One, I have run into this situation a lot. It's easier not to make a choice, and I remind them, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, and there will be consequences. And so wouldn't you like to know what the consequences might be? That's why we're going to do this modeling for you. The other thing is to also show them the consequences. One of the things I've often advocated for is, for example, talk about the trade-offs, and we're going to fish this species in the FMSY, but not worry about the predator. Well, that is the nice thing you can do with this model. Do simpler models to calculate your FMSY, put them into EWE, and demonstrate that perhaps you can't achieve that policy given the interactions, and use this model for that sort of thing. So I think there's ways to do this with the modeling a bit, and not have to go into a bunch of different stakeholders. I still do think that's a good idea to bring on other stakeholders, though.
Any more questions? I think we're at the coffee break, or do we have? Oh no, we first have to have a family photo. Because this is a huge group, so we definitely want a family photo, and then a coffee break. So if we can just have it outside again, we'll be For those of you who are being live streamed, we're going to stop now and talk about you. Bye.
Si puedes ir coordinando mientras yo hago esto.